Every move, trade, signing, or draft pick that's been made in the NBA has led it to where it is and how it is today. But there's been certain instances where if just minor changes were made, and if what seemed like small decisions at the time were made differently, could have and would have changed the entire landscape of the NBA as we know it today. And now these are known as what-ifs, that leave fans to only wondering how things really would look if those other decisions were made instead. So we're going to be looking at 8 of the greatest, most realistic ones within the past 10 years or so. What if Derrick Rose was never injured? The young Chicago Bulls Derrick Rose, who was the youngest MVP in NBA history, that at only 22 years old led his team to 62 wins by putting up 25, 7, and 4 and being a true leader, looked like the brightest young star we'd ever seen, with some people believing he would have been one of, if not the best point guard of all time, had his career not been devastated by injuries the way it was. Now we do have to say that in Rose's MVP season, the Bulls still did get knocked out 4-1 in the Eastern Conference Finals by LeBron and the Miami Heat. And with how that team dominated the Bulls, they had a lot of improving to do if they were ever going to beat them. But I mean, Derrick was the only all-star on that team in 2011, and Joakim Noah and Luol Deng hadn't even gotten to their peak yet. But the two of them and the rest of the team did by 2014, when everyone stepped up huge while Rose was dealing with injuries. There's no telling if they would have if he was healthy, but let's assume they did. By 2014, Joakim was a 2-time member of the All-Defensive First Team and had just won the Defensive Player of the Year award. And Luol Deng was still one of the best defenders in the league, putting up 19 points a game. Now Rose had a very small window to work with here, since right after 2014, both Noah and Deng's talent fell off of a cliff. But that's still not even to mention how much D Rose would have developed if he had stayed healthy. 3 years removed from his MVP season with better teammates and more threats on offense, the man could have very well won another MVP by then and been putting up nearly 30 points and close to 10 assists a game. And with a young Jimmy Butler who they still would have gotten because he didn't get drafted until 30th overall, Carlos Boozer, Taj Gibson, a developed Joakim Noah and Luol Deng, other quality role players, and an MVP caliber Derrick Rose, this could have very well been your 2014 NBA championship team. What if Miami's Big Three was formed in Chicago? Dwayne Wade has come out in the past and recently and claimed that the Chicago Bulls were right at the top of their list, with the Miami Heat as his and LeBron's destinations to join and make a super team. They ended up all going to Miami with Bosh, but what if they had actually gone to the Bulls and teamed up with Derrick Rose? Well, I think for this scenario, for the sake of our imaginations, let's just also assume that Derrick never gets injured here. And I think this whole thing starts off by assuming that they would probably trade away Luol Deng and keep Joakim Noah at center, which under Tom Thibodeau would give them a defensive-minded team with a great defensive center and a stretch 4 in Carlos Boozer to combine with Derrick Rose, Dwayne Wade, and LeBron James. The best point guard at the time, the best small forward, and the second best shooting guard. And this would have really made things easier for them than they already were on the Heat, because early on the Bulls were Miami's biggest competition. The only thing extra that the Heat would have to worry about in the East would be Bosh and the Raptors, which isn't saying much. Assuming that these three guys all would have fit together though, they would have easily been one of the most dominant teams we've ever seen, and potentially won more than LeBron and Wade did in Miami. But on the downside, Derrick Rose would have never won an MVP or been the youngest MVP, and we wouldn't have ever gotten to see his true potential until much later on when the team broke up, if we're assuming he stayed healthy. What if the Trailblazers picked Kevin Durant? Now, as many of us know, the Portland Trailblazers had the first overall pick in the 2007 NBA draft, and with it they infamously chose Greg Oden over KD. And as we know, Oden would be out of the league after just 2 seasons because of injuries, and Durant is arguably the best player in the world right now, which has led some fans, Blazers fans especially, to wondering how things would have looked if they would have taken KD first overall instead of Greg Oden. Well, let's take a look. As a rookie, Kevin Durant showed that he would be a star in the league right away, averaging 20 points a game on pretty solid shooting numbers. And he would have joined a team led by LaMarcus Aldridge and Brandon Roy, who still had 3 solid years before his injuries started. And in KD's original rookie season, this Blazers team without much help from Oden finished 41-41. But the next year is where things get interesting, where Durant jumps up to averaging 25, 5, and 2 on 47% from the field and 42% from 3. And Brandon Roy is playing the best of his career, putting up 22, 5, and 5 on 36% from 3. Which led to the Blazers finishing with a record of 54-28 and losing in the first round of the playoffs. They played pretty much on that same level the next season, but by then KD was averaging 30 points and 7 rebounds a game. So you gotta wonder, if you combine these two forces, is this a championship team? Do Kevin Durant, Brandon Roy, and LaMarcus Aldridge lead Portland to their first championship in nearly 30 years? I mean, KD and Russ's playstyles were never a great fit together anyways, so that problem would have been avoided. Harden and Russ might still be playing together to this day, which means no other teammate would ever touch the ball. OKC would still be heavily disappointed about ending up with Greg Oden. Durant could have won an MVP much sooner, and Damian Lillard probably never ends up in Portland. What if the Pacers kept Kawhi Leonard? The Pacers infamously made one of their biggest franchise mistakes when they traded away the pick that became Kawhi Leonard for George Hill, who, as we all know, never turned out to be great. We've seen how Kawhi developed with the Spurs and became one of the best defenders in the league, a Finals MVP, and an NBA champion. But what if that hadn't have happened? Things would be a lot different than you'd probably expect. Without Leonard's defense, the Spurs don't beat the Heat in the 2014 Finals, if they even make it there, and Tim Duncan doesn't retire on a championship run. But it's a different story from the Pacers' perspective, who would have teamed up Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Danny Granger early on, to where Granger would eventually get injured, but Kawhi and Paul George would still have Lance Stevenson, David West, and Roy Hibbert to round out the lineup. I mean, even without Kawhi, that Pacers team took LeBron and the Heat to a Game 7 in 2013 and a Game 6 in the 2014 Eastern Conference Finals. So you gotta imagine that with him and his defense, it probably would have been just enough to beat them and make it to the NBA Finals. And how convenient is it that San Antonio made the finals both of those years? So if the Spurs did end up making it that far, the Pacers would have either played the Spurs without Leonard, or another team which I think they still would have beat. With two of the best two-way players in the league and Roy Hibbert, I think this Pacers team might have struggled with outside shooting, but they'd be unstoppable on defense and serious title contenders as long as they were together. Now there's always a chance that Kawhi never developed as much without Popovich and the Spurs, but I think he was going to be as great as he is no matter what. What if Klay doesn't go crazy in the 2016 Western Conference Finals? This is a single game with a single performance by a single man that changed the entire NBA today. Because as you'll remember, in the 2016 Western Conference Finals, the OKC Thunder were on fire and found themselves up 3-1 on the Warriors before they blew a 3-1 lead. The Warriors then took Game 5, but Game 6 came around in OKC, and this was their chance to close out the series. And they almost did. The Thunder led for 44 minutes, and the Warriors couldn't get anything going. Curry had the usual 31, Draymond only had 12, and their only other player who scored double digits that night was Klay, who had one of the best games of his career, putting up 41 points with a playoff record 11 3-pointers, shooting 61% from 3. He had a hand in his face for almost every shot that he took, but it was just one of those nights for him when he was on fire. Like I said, the Thunder led almost all game, but Klay single-handedly brought them back and extended the series. Now if it wasn't for Klay in this game, and the Thunder win and head to the NBA Finals, even Steve Kerr said, if they beat us and go to the finals, it's tough to see Durant ever coming to play for us. And that's true. If they make it to the finals that year or even win the championship, Durant probably doesn't join the Warriors and probably doesn't even leave the Thunder. And just like that, the entire league for the past 3 seasons looks completely different. What if the Timberwolves draft Steph Curry? Back in 2009, the Minnesota Timberwolves made 2 of the worst draft decisions within a matter of minutes. When in need of a point guard, they take Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn with picks 5 and 6 over Steph Curry. Now at the time, it wasn't as bad of a decision as it looks now, but it's still definitely wasn't great. So what would things look like had they taken Steph with either of those picks? Well, it would have teamed him up with Kevin Love, who was drafted the year before, and with this duo, that means that the Wolves wouldn't have had a losing record and been one of the worst teams in the league every single year that Kevin played there. I'd still expect Steph to transform into an MVP level player and Love to be dominant. But with the T-Wolves front office's track record, I wouldn't expect him to bring this duo much help, which means they probably wouldn't be NBA champions. But they could still make some deep playoff runs. It also means that the Warriors keep Monte Ellis around until he fades out of the league, and then who knows where the team with Klay Thompson and Draymond Green go from there. But it does mean that those Warriors aren't as dominant, so the Thunder wouldn't have blown that 3-1 lead like I just mentioned, and LeBron wouldn't have had to compete with the Warriors in the finals all these years, which means he would have more titles or Russ and KD would have some together. What if the Thunder didn't trade James Harden? This is one of the most talked about what-ifs in recent NBA history. Now we know that James Harden had to leave OKC because they didn't have enough money to give him what he wanted, but remember that they had just given Serge Ibaka a contract and used up that money right before offering Harden his, essentially keeping Ibaka over James. But what if they traded Ibaka so that they could give James Harden what he wanted? What if they kept together their big three of Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Kevin Durant? Three guys that on their own would all go on to be league MVPs. Now we saw what Russ and KD did together, and I don't know that OKC would have ever moved Harden to be a starter, and we might not ever be seeing him play at an MVP level, but let's assume that he stayed and played so good on the bench that they had no choice but to start him. Well, it's nice on paper to think about the fact of having three league MVPs all on the same team, one who just had the highest scoring season in over 30 years, one who's a triple-double machine, and another who's possibly the best player in the league. But I mean, there was barely enough ball for just Durant and Westbrook. Sure, they all made it work and made it to the NBA Finals when they were younger, but if they played a few more years together and were all in their prime, I think there'd be some problems. I mean, Russ and Harden recently have had the two highest usage ratings in NBA history while on their teams alone, which could make Durant a third option on this OKC team, which would be a disservice to everyone. Personally, I don't think these guys could have made it work, seeing how they all play now, but who knows, maybe they could have, and they'd all just take on lighter roles than they have now. It would mean that KD wouldn't be a snake, and wouldn't be the only one with multiple NBA titles. What if the Chris Paul trade was never vetoed? The Chris Paul trade was the closest what if to actually happening because as we know the trade actually went through. And for one reason or another David Stern vetoed it. And that meant that the Lakers eventually ended up settling for Steve Nash, who was never healthy through his whole time on the team. And that and Dwight Howard's attitude led the Lakers super team to being a huge disappointment. But if the trade hadn't have gotten vetoed, it would have been Kobe Bryant, Chris Paul, and Dwight Howard. Now keep in mind, this trade has a much bigger impact than you might think, because CP3 would have been a Laker during the 2011 and 12 season. And during his time on the Rockets, he's proven that he can play with a ball-dominant shooting guard, so chemistry wouldn't have been a problem, which means that he could have made a difference in the Lakers losing to the young Thunder team in that year's playoffs. And if they could do that, there's a chance that they could have gone to the finals, which means we could have seen a Kobe Bryant vs LeBron James NBA Finals. But even more important than that, the next season was a disappointment with LA's actual big three, which led to Kobe playing almost 48 minutes a game towards the end of the year to help his team even make the playoffs. And then at 34, after playing over 40 minutes a game for 7 games in a row, he tears his Achilles. Something that might not have happened if prime Chris Paul was there to lighten the load and take some of the pressure off Kobe, who was still averaging 28 a game. Now the rest of the team wasn't that great, which is why they still got swept without Kobe, but with this big three healthy, who knows what they could have done in the playoffs that year. And even in the next year, since Bryant's game wouldn't have been brought down with that injury. And maybe that means Dwight Howard stays with the team and doesn't have such a bad rest of his career. But it would have also affected the Rockets and Pelicans as well, but for the sake of the video, we were just focused on the Lakers. And there's no doubt that this and the rest of these would have had a huge impact and led us to a much different NBA today. So which one's your favorite? And which one do you guys wish we could see the outcome of the most? Comment down below and let me know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.